Hi, my name is Helen Adams from Oakmead Clinic and I'm your host for this webinar called I Don't Know What to Eat. This webinar is the guide that goes with my book of the same name. You can get the book on Amazon or you can get it on my website www.oakmeadclinic.co.uk. What's in the webinar that isn't in the book? Not everything makes the cut. So I wanted to give you 5 ways to improve your food issues, including some bonus material that isn't in my book. Now this webinar is recorded, so you won't be able to ask any questions here, but there is a Facebook group called Nutrition on a Plate. Go ahead and sign up for that and you can ask questions in there. I'm there to support you and help you with this new journey to better health. Look forward to meeting you. I wanted to explain how food relates to your immune system and what can go wrong with it. First of all, let me tell you about the inside of your body and your immune system. And actually, it is a whole system. It's not just one specific type of cell. It's lots of different cells and they all have different jobs to do. And we don't need to get into that level of complexity as to specifically what cells have what jobs, but just take it that it's like an army and it's very specialized, so different cells do different things at different times, but there are lots of them. Now, so the cells that we're particularly interested in in relation to food are called antibodies. And antibodies include in the name antibody, so they are fighting against something. And what they're fighting against is called an antigen, or something that can provoke a response from the immune system. That's the way to think about it. How does something get to be an antigen rather than just a food? But for the moment, let's think a bit more about antibodies. Your body is creating new cells all the time. So different cells in your body have different lifespan. Your blood cells, for example, the red platelets that carry oxygen around your body, they live for about 3 months. And then they get worn out, broken down, replaced by a whole new set. Not all at the same time. And the cells in your gut, so that's everything from up here, your throat, to down below, all of that length of piping, that gets replaced every 3 to 4 days. So it's very, very frequent, because with the passage of food through your intestines, that causes a lot of damage to your intestines, and so therefore the cells are replaced very often to keep you fit and healthy. How do antibodies even get trained? Do they know what an allergen is? How do they know that? Well, they start life almost like blanks. So they're created, they have a chemical structure and a chemical signature, but they're not particularly interested in anything really, anything in particular. They just wander around your body, not really doing much, just there. And then something will alert them to the presence of an invader. Let's call it an invader. A pathogen, or it could be a food. So a pathogen is something that's dangerous. So it could be bacteria, it could be a virus, or it could be food in the wrong place. The antibody will go and have a look at that and think, I don't know, don't recognise that. I don't think I've seen that before. Is that the right thing to be in this body? So do I recognise that as self? So there is this concept of self is an academic definition, if you like, that means anything to do with you, of your body. It's called self. So the antibody goes up to it and says, do I recognise you as self? And if it doesn't, then it will mount an attack. It will go right up to it, gobble it up, kill it, smother it. So that's the end of the pathogen. And in the process, they are fighting against something. And what they're fighting against is called an antigen, or something that can provoke a response from the immune system. That's the way to think about it. How does something get to be an antigen rather than just a food? But for the moment, let's think a bit more about antibodies. Your body is creating new cells all the time. Different cells in your body have different lifespan. So your blood cells, for example, the red platelets that carry oxygen around your body, they live for about 3 months. And then they get worn out, broken down, replaced by a whole new set. Not all at the same time. And the cells in your gut, so that's everything from, up here, your throat, to down below, all of that length of piping, that gets replaced every 3 to 4 days. So it's very, very frequent, because with the passage of food through your intestines, that causes a lot of damage to your intestines, and so therefore the cells are replaced very often to keep you fit and healthy. There is this concept of self is an academic definition that means anything to do with you, of your body. It's called self. So the antibody goes up to it and says, do I recognize you as self? And if it doesn't, then it will mount an attack. It will go right up to it, gobble it up, kill it, smother it. So that's the end of the pathogen. And in the process, it will probably be the end of the antibody as well. But before it finally gives up the ghost, it will display a little bit of that pathogen, food, bacteria, virus, whatever it was, on the outside of the cell. And it will show that to all its colleagues and say, look what I've got here, this bit of, let's say it's a bit of virus or a bit of gluten, let's say it's gluten, look what I've got, this is gluten. And then all the other antibodies will come up and brush past this cell and say, oh, I've learnt gluten. So then all those antibodies will be very specific to gluten. So an antibody can only recognize one thing. It's either blank, doesn't have any particular reason to go after anything as such, and then once it learns one particular pathogen, it will seek that pathogen, or it will be alerted to that pathogen forever until it dies. So the original cell that found the pathogen will die, but all these new cells that are trained will then keep looking for that one single pathogen until they die. We have 5 different types of antibodies. We don't really need to go into the differences between them just at the moment, but the 2 that do come up in terms of, or in relation to foods, whether it's allergies or intolerances, or sensitivities I should say, are IgG, that's one type of antibody, and IgE. And the Ig, the first Ig bit of that, stands for immunoglobulin. Again, big word, you don't need to remember it, but you may come across IgG and IgE. And if you come across IgE, then that type of antibody is applicable to allergies, because that type of antibody lives for a very long time in the body, and it mounts a very, very rapid response, certainly within half an hour, but up to 3 hours. Antibodies that are IgE antibodies, and there are a smaller number of those in the body, but those type of antibodies will very rapidly mount a response to that problem, that antigen, pathogen, whatever it was, bring in all the other troops to sort of take over and do what they need to do, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in just a minute. So an IgG antibody it takes a little bit longer to sort of mount a response. It's not as quick as IgE, and it doesn't last in the body as long as IgE. So 3 years after you had a food sensitivity, for example, you could retest to see if you had any IgG antibodies, and you may not. And that would tell you that you didn't have a current problem with that food if you were doing lab testing. But if you did that with IgE, then that IgE antibody response may be in your body for life. So if you were celiac, for example, it wouldn't do you any good at all retesting sometime later, even lots of years later, because there would still be some IgE presence to whatever that initial food was. So in the case of celiac disease, of course, it would be gluten. Now let's just talk about what happens when IgE or IgG when they get involved. So what do they do? Well, they don't fight on their own, and as I said, the immune response covers a lot of different types of cells. But with IgE, the ones that we are particularly interested in is something called mast cells, and these release something called histamine. So even if you're not very scientific, you will have heard of histamine through antihistamines that you can buy in your chemist for hay fever symptoms. And you know what they do is they stop your eyes itching and your eyes running and your nose running and your throat feeling really tight and itchy. That's what they do. So antihistamine brings down all those sort of reactions. So histamine raises those sort of reactions in the first place. So the IgE, so working backwards, so the IgE antibody creates the circumstances under which more histamine is released. And then when that level of histamine, when a lot of histamine is released, particularly in the throat, this is where we hear about the swelling and the throat closing up, and then people can't breathe, and that's when they need to either go to hospital or they may have something called an EpiPen. And because it's in a chemical form, it goes, injected into the body. It goes straight around the body very, very quickly, straight to the areas which need it, and so calms that response before the person is actually killed through not being able to breathe. An allergic response can be really, really serious, and if you experience that sort of response, please make sure that you go and see your doctor and get checked out. And if it is that level of seriousness, and we'll probably be familiar with that with things like peanuts, your doctor will no doubt recommend the appropriate thing for you to have. To explain now about intestinal permeability, and that's a bit of a mouthful, so instead of that, really you'd probably be more familiar with it as leaky gut. So what does leaky gut mean? Well, leaky gut means that instead of being a nice tight pipe in your intestines for the food to just flow through, or what's left of your food to flow through nice and easily, that pipe has got holes in it. How does it get the holes? Well, everything that goes through that pipe should be really finely broken down into almost like its base, well, indeed, its base nutrients. So tiny, tiny particles that can just be absorbed straight through the walls of the gut. And the gut is really thin. It's only one cell thick. And then behind that is the blood supply, the blood vessels. When nutrients are absorbed, they go through the gut wall and then straight into the blood vessels, and the blood vessels are the transport system for your body, so then the nutrients travel all over your body. There should be, between all the cells in your gut, they should be really tight together. So I think you can see that, my hands tight together, so that if anything comes through this way, and you can see my picture over here shows it better probably than my hands do, but nothing can get through there because the cells are sort of tightly stuck together, and they're actually something between them that's almost like stitches that keeps them like that. Now certain foods like gluten actually break those stitches, and so you get gaps literally like this. Now when you have a gap, anything that's travelling in the channel above here, so travelling inside your intestine, can then get through that gap and then get straight into the bloodstream and into the inside of the body, where actually those things should not be. They're not designed for that. So gluten is one of the things that does that. Alcohol also does the same thing. Alcohol breaks those junctions between the cells. Why that matters is because then when, let's say it's gluten, gets into the inside of your body, it's a foreign substance. It shouldn't be there. So your immune system then mounts a response to it, as if to say, I know you are not self. Remember that concept we spoke about earlier? I know you're not self, therefore you are a pathogen, even though actually you're food, and normally I would like to eat you very much, but you are, in this context, because you're in the wrong place, you are a pathogen, therefore I'm going to gobble you up, I'm going to call in all my mates, and we're going to attack every bit of gluten we see, and then you are set with that problem for quite some time. Once these boundaries between these bonds between the cells in the gut, once they are broken, in the case of alcohol, if it's an occasional drink, this is just it lasts for 20 minutes actually, just 20 minutes, and then these things are sort of knitted back together again. But in the case of gluten, gluten does something else as well as just break this bond. So gluten is quite an abrasive substance in the gut, and it's a bit like a scrubbing brush. As well as breaking those bonds, if you can imagine it scrubbing away at the top of your intestines, for celiacs, people who have celiac disease, then that gluten can actually scrub away the top of their intestines until they're almost flat. And then they've lost the ability, those people have lost the ability to be able to absorb fats from their food, to be able to absorb a lot of minerals and vitamins, and generally they're very sick. But even if it doesn't get to quite that extent, gluten is still damaging. So because of all that damage that happens all the time from other foods as well as gluten, then the cells in the gut don't last very long. They are about 3 or 4 days, and then they are replaced. Not all at the same time, but each one has only a life of about 4 days, and then there's a brand new one that comes up. So in essence, that's what leaky gut is about. Let's go back to our gluten example. So we had our tight junctions, gluten comes along, breaks those bonds, then we have a big open passageway where any particles that are travelling through the intestine can get through into the body. So let's just say in your meal you had gluten, because let's say you had a sandwich. So in your sandwich, in your bread, you would have had some gluten. You would have had, let's say, some lettuce and some mayonnaise and some ham, for example. So if those bits are travelling with the gluten through your intestines, and then there's this gap, well, any of those things, any particles that are left, if they're not properly broken down, could then get into your body, into your bloodstream. Your immune system would be alerted to them, and then your immune system would develop antibodies to all those things. So sometimes people say to me, oh, well, I know I can't eat avocado, or I can't eat green beans, or I can't eat, things that seem to be completely innocuous. And you think, well, why on earth should that be a problem? And it's not so much because of the food itself, it's just wrong place, wrong time. And if those foods get through the gut into the inside of the body where they shouldn't be, then your immune system can build up that sort of response to them. I wanted to explain why stomach acid is so important. So we all know in our stomachs, our food goes in there and it's mixed up. It's just churned around like in a washing machine. And you'll also know that in your washing machine, you need some sufficient water to get through the clothes, and you need sufficient cleaning agent, so the washing powder or washing liquid, that will go through all the fibres and lift the dirt out. In your stomach, you have something that's a little bit similar. You need gastric juices, the main one of those being stomach acid. And the stomach acid helps break down the food. In your stomach, you have a combination of chemical action from the stomach acid itself and mechanical action from muscles that go around your stomach that push the food and squeeze the muscles in different directions so that that food can be broken down properly. So by the time food leaves your stomach, it's a liquid. And everything in there is not completely broken down, but the breakdown process has started. Now there can be reasons why you have a less satisfactory exit from that position. One of those would be something called H. pylori. You may have heard this before. So this is a bug that actually likes to live in your stomach. Now you'd think, well, how can that be? Because stomach acid is really corrosive. It's more corrosive than car battery acid. It would dissolve a coin if you left a coin in it. It really is very, very, very acidic. So how could anything live in that? Well, H. pylori are very clever. From the shape of your stomach, which you can see here, at the top of that, H. pylori likes to live in that part where there is less stomach acid and where they are less likely to be bathed in that acid, and they burrow into the side of your stomach wall and fix themselves there. So they can stay there quite happily. Now what they also do is they change the acidic environment in the stomach so that it's actually less acidic, which suits them very nicely, but unfortunately doesn't do a lot for you for breaking down your food. I want to talk now about something called proton pump inhibitors and stomach acid. You may or may not be familiar with that word, proton pump inhibitors, but you might have heard of medications such as omeprazole, lansoprazole, things like that. And what they're used for is to deliberately reduce the amount of stomach acid that you produce. And you might think, well, surely I need my stomach acid. Why would I want to reduce it? So, you're right, you do need it, but there are certain circumstances where it may be helpful temporarily, like for a short time, a few weeks only, to have a bit less stomach acid. And those sorts of situations would be if you have a stomach ulcer, where if you had acid washing against that ulcer, acid burns, it would make it really, really sore. Or if you have a condition called Barrett's esophagus, or if you have reflux or any sort of condition affecting this pipe between your throat up here down to your stomach. So for any of those conditions, quite often those proton pump inhibitors are used. And they reduce the stomach acid, and the theory goes that then you won't get acid washing up into your esophagus, and therefore there will be time for whatever has caused that problem to heal, for the cells to heal, and then you'll be better. If those sort of medications are used for a short period, a few weeks, that sort of order of magnitude, then that theory works very well. The medication is designed to deal with a particular symptom. It deals with the symptom, which is getting acid coming up from your stomach. However, it doesn't deal with the cause. So why did that happen in the first place? There could be a number of reasons for that, but what's more alarming, I think now, is that very often people are put on these proton pump inhibitors and they're left on them. And in fact, I have heard one of my clients has said before now, oh well, I did ask my doctor about coming off them, and my doctor said, no, stay on them, they're fine, because all the time you're on the medication, that problem can't happen. Well, that symptom can't happen, so having the acid wash up into your esophagus. So yes, that's true, but all the time you're on that medication, you cannot break down your food properly. And in addition to that, you're also not able to make B12. Now, vitamin B12 is a very important vitamin that you need for energy and for quite a few other things as well. It's very, very important. I see many people who feel really, really fatigued, and the reason they're so fatigued is because those cells that produce B12 are not able to do so, either because of proton pump inhibitors. So it's very, very important. So if you are taking a proton pump inhibitor, it's always worth asking your doctor for a review as to whether it's still necessary and whether you can gradually reduce the amount you're taking and when you can stop taking them, because there should be no need for you to be on them forever. They really shouldn't. And they've been associated with lots of quite serious health conditions. I do talk about this in my book, I Don't Know What to Eat, the definitive guide to food allergies, intolerances and sensitivities and what to do about it. I've got quite a lot of information in there, including lots of academic references to particular studies done that have covered this area. So if this relates to you and you haven't read my book yet, what are you waiting for? Go and get it now. It's on Amazon. If you've already read that and you know it, this is just a little reminder that we do need our stomach acid. Now, if we don't have stomach acid, what happens? We know it's not the only thing that's used to break down our food. So we have, as well as that chemical action in the stomach, we have mechanical action. So we have the muscles that churn the food in the stomach. We have digestive enzymes that come into play in the small intestine, and they again are a chemical reaction that helps to break food down more. But if the food isn't properly broken down and it carries on its journey through the intestines as it should, then we are more likely to suffer from leaky gut, and I've already explained what that does, because the food particles are not sufficiently broken down, and when we have particles that are larger than they should be, they just are identified as foreign and therefore can result in an immune response. So very important to make sure that you do have enough stomach acid, and on my website you will find a little test that you can do at home just to see what your own level of stomach acid is.